Ielts practice. Questions 1 and 2. You will hear a tutor and some students discussing science and ethics. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 and 2. And answer questions 1 and 2.
In the 19th century, scientific discoveries took a long time to produce any actual applications, and scientists might have had a case for giving little thought to the social or environmental impact of their work. That all changed in the 20th century, with the huge advances first in physics and then in biology. Science started to play a much more important role in our lives, and the relationship between scientists and society became much closer. Many scientists became increasingly concerned about the ethics of what they were doing, as they quickly saw the consequences. The benefits, such as vastly improved crop yields and the eradication of diseases like bubonic plague, but also terrible damage in the form of pollution and chemical weapons.
Yes, but some scientists still claim even today that their only duty is to make public the findings of their research. They need to do that, of course, but I think the key points are that they ought to stop making any distinction between pure science and applied science, because in practical terms it no longer exists. And also they must accept full responsibility for the consequences of their work.
Now listen and answer questions 3 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 3 to 10.
Let's explore that last point a little further. How can scientists put that responsibility into practice?
By educating the public, particularly through the media and at the workplace.
Another thing they must do is advise on what might one day go wrong as a result of what they're coming up with now.
That seems essential. And just as importantly, if and when things do go wrong, they need to sort them out, especially where the fault lies with the original research.
How do you feel about the international role of scientists, given that their work crosses frontiers so readily?
I think it gives them, or at least should give them, a global view. In this respect, some of them are better placed than many politicians to see how new discoveries are likely to affect particular parts of the world.
But will the politicians listen?
Probably not. But I'm not suggesting getting involved with politics or politicians. Much better to raise the public's awareness of scientific issues so they can put the pressure on at election time.
There's a problem here, though, isn't there, with the way the public sees scientists? They're all either mad or bad.
That's something they need to work on, definitely. To regain public trust, they'll have to show they're accountable, and that science is about improving people's lives.
That may not be so easy. What do you think are the areas in science that really worry people these days?
Science in agriculture, above all. There's been all this media hysteria about Frankenstein foods, but there is a genuine issue here. Whether adding specific genes to plants is a valid way of increasing food production, or whether it risks the appearance of new diseases, of superweeds and pests.
Which links it to another controversy, using chemicals to control pests. And that's something else that was at first thought to be harmless, but we now know that the careless spraying of crops has led to all kinds of health problems for people. Plus a devastating loss of biodiversity, with huge numbers of insects, birds and mammals simply disappearing from the countryside, fish dying in poisoned rivers and so on.
And of course, if we're talking about death on a massive scale, then we have to mention the role of science in enabling the military to wage chemical and biological and nuclear warfare, which has destroyed life in so many parts of the world.
Okay, I think we've identified some major topics there.
There's something I'd like to add, if I may. Sure, it's important for scientists and future scientists to talk about major issues like these, but we might also want to look at what we can do or not do in our everyday lives, particularly as many of us will be earning more money than we actually need for basic necessities. I'm thinking here of things like burning fossil fuels by driving everywhere. What do you think?
Well, something that scientists seem to do rather too often is take planes to distant places, which is highly damaging environmentally.
For instance, to attend conferences on subjects like the disappearing ozone layer.
When nowadays they could probably stay at work and use a video conferencing link anyway.
Which may in fact be an example of how progress in computer science can impact positively on the environment.
But going back to harmful things, what else can be done?
Again, on the air transport theme, there are the huge distances a lot of consumer goods travel before they actually reach the shops in this country. This seems another extreme waste of energy, especially if much of what is being produced and carried is packaging. Perhaps it's worth shopping for more locally produced items.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Hi,
Hello.
how can we help you?
Is this the Office of Institutional Real Estate?
Yes, sir. My name's Alice Baum, and I'm a university housing supervisor.
Oh, good. I wonder if you could help me.
I'll certainly try, sir.
I'm hoping to rent an apartment from September when I begin here, and I'd really like some advice on where to rent and how to rent a place.
Advice on renting in Manhattan. We've got plenty of advice about that. The first thing to think about are the prices. New York is an expensive place to live, and Manhattan is the most expensive place in New York. Everyone wants to be here. In most areas of Manhattan, you'll have great difficulty finding a studio apartment for less than $1,300 to $1,400 per month. But there are areas just outside Manhattan, within a 30 to 40-minute commute, where you can find a decent studio apartment to rent for $850 to $1,000 per month.
That's a big difference. But then there are travel costs on top of that.
Yes, there are. If you're prepared to make compromises in your choice of accommodation, perhaps you can find an apartment you like and can afford. Monthly rents also depend on 2 other factors: apartment size and then amenities.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Basically, bigger flats get higher rents, so if you can live without a lot of space, it's much cheaper. And if you're willing to take a flat which has street noise or doesn't have much natural light, then you may save some more money.
I see.
However, you could go the other way and get a bigger flat and share it with another student. You can cut costs by sharing a large bedroom. To find a roommate, check the listings for apartment shares in the housing registry.
Share a flat. I hadn't given that idea much thought.
Lots of our students do that.
What about amenities? Can you explain that a bit more?
You need to decide what facilities you really would like and what you can do without. For example, do you want a doorman, Would you like an elevator? These kinds of things put the prices up.
I don't think I need a doorman. Is there anything else I should know?
Yes, remember, the housing market is very competitive, especially for affordable apartments. You need to be prepared to make decisions quickly and be flexible with your plans. Don't start your search earlier than 4 weeks before you want to move in, because tenants only need to give landlords 30 days' notice of their departure.
Okay.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
And make apartment hunting your life for 2 or 3 weeks. That should be enough time to get familiar with the market and find what you're looking for.
What's the best way of finding a place?
There are really only 2 ways. You do it yourself, or you get someone else to do it for you.
That sounds interesting. How do I do that?
There are property brokers who will find a place for you. They can guide you to the property of your choice and help you with the paperwork.
Well, that sounds great.
But they do charge you a commission fee. In Manhattan, expect to pay between 12 and 15% of the year's rent. That means if your rent is $1,000 a month, the broker's fee works out to $1,800.
Oh, maybe not a broker then. And what's the other option again?
Do the legwork yourself. Look in the classified ads, call landlord companies, and do online searches. Check out our website first.
You mentioned paperwork. Could you tell me something about that?
Sure. To rent an apartment, you may be asked to complete an application by your prospective landlord. You may also be asked to pay between $50 and $200 for credit reports. Landlords want to see evidence of steady income and good credit.
I see.
Because you're a full-time student, most landlords will require a guarantor, someone to guarantee you will pay the rent on time. And when the landlord approves your apartment application, be prepared to pay the first month's rent and the deposit when you sign the lease.
That's a lot to think about, and it sounds like a lot of hard work. Thank you very much for the advice.
You're very welcome, and good luck.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3. You are going to hear a conversation on animal protection. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen to the tape and answer the questions.
Thanks for joining us today, Mike. How did Baja California become a consideration for a condor release?
Our recovery plan for California condors requires us to re-establish the birds in as much as their former range as possible. Baja, being the southernmost recent range for the California condor, works well in that they were only recently lost from the area, mid-1930s, and considerable habitat still remains. It is very isolated with very few people in the area. The mountains are spectacular, ranging up to 10,000 feet, or 3,000 meters. Our selected release site is at nearly 8,000 feet, 2,400 meters.
Mike, How many birds do you envision flying free in this area, Baja, in the future?
We will be releasing 4 to 8 birds on a yearly basis and will reconsider the situation when we have 20 birds in the area.
What age do the birds have to be before moving them?
That's a good question. Typically, we move them at 8 months to 18 months old. Birds are ready to fledge, or leave, from the nest at 6 to 7 months of age. In our current release group in Baja, we have birds as old as 30 months. It will be interesting to see how they behave. I expect that they will want to range more than younger birds and make it challenging for us to keep up.
Is there a maximum number of birds a certain area can support?
Yes, it's called the carrying capacity for any area, for any species. In our case, our strategy to find that number is to saturate the environment to a level where we determine that the birds are showing difficulty either in finding food, behaviourally, or in survivorship. That level is greatly determined by the availability of food in the area and nesting possibilities.
Now look at questions 26 to 30. As the talk continues, answer questions 26 to 30.
What do you hope to accomplish with this release in the long run?
I expect that well within 10 years the condors will be flying north and joining birds already released in Southern California. Hopefully we will reach at least 150 birds in each of these populations within about 15 years.
What would you say is the biggest contribution to the California Condor program's success?
That would have to be the fact that we were able to breed the birds in captivity from the 27 birds we started with in 1987 to the 205 birds we have today. This is thanks to cooperation between the San Diego Wild Animal Park, the Los Angeles Zoo, and the World Center for Birds of Prey in Boise, Idaho.
Are there any problems keeping track of and protecting your released animals outside of the US?
Nope. We are using radio transmitters and will be using the new satellite and GPS transmitters as well.
Which system is better?
Using satellites. The advantages over radio telemetry are numerous. It makes it possible to keep up with the bird's flight without being led miles in a matter of minutes. It took the young condor only a week to migrate across the state, and with just radio telemetry, poor weather can keep a plane grounded, and not all roads are accessible to track them on ground. New technology will allow one to be able to track birds that are not accessible by plane. Also, it is a new way to gauge the effectiveness of reintroduction.
How so?
If a condor transmitter works properly, researchers will get a location every 10 days for about 2 years.
Do you see an end in sight for the need to breed condors in captivity?
Yes, that would be great. But it will take a while for us to establish the 2 wild populations and make sure that they are sustainable. Part of our recovery is to maintain a captive flock of 150 birds in various zoos around the country as a safety net for the future.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear an extract from a university lecture on the topic of marketing. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Last week we looked at some general principles associated with marketing, and today I'd like to look at some of those points in a little more detail. So, what is marketing? Or put another way, what does the term marketing mean? Many people think of it simply as the process of selling and advertising. And this is hardly surprising when every day we are bombarded with television adverts, mail shots, and telephone sales. But selling and advertising are only two functions of marketing. In fact, marketing, more than any other business function, deals with customers. So perhaps the simplest definition is this one. Marketing is the delivery of customer value and satisfaction at a profit. In other words, finding customers, keeping those customers happy, and making money out of the process. The most basic concept underlying marketing is the concept of human needs. These include basic physical needs for things like food, as well as warmth and safety. And marketers don't invent these needs. They're a basic part of our human makeup. So, besides physical needs, there are also social needs, for instance, the need to belong and to be wanted. And in addition to social needs, we have the need for knowledge and self-expression, often referred to as individual needs. As societies evolve, members of that society start to see things not so much in terms of what they need, but in terms of what they want. And when people have enough money, these wants become demands. Now, it's important for the managers in a company to understand what their customers want if they're going to create effective marketing strategies, so there are various ways of doing this. One way at supermarkets, for instance, is to interview customers while they're doing their shopping. They can be asked about their buying preferences, and then the results of the survey can be analyzed. This provides reliable feedback on which to base future marketing strategies. It's also quite normal for top executives from department stores to spend a day or two each month visiting stores and mixing freely with the public, as if they were ordinary customers, to get an idea of customer behavior. Another way to get information from customers is to give them something. For instance, some fast food outlets give away vouchers in magazines or on the street that entitle customers to get part of their meal for nothing. As well as being a good way of attracting customers into the restaurants to spend their money, it also allows the managers to get a feel for where to advertise and which age groups to target. Another strategy employed at some well-known theme parks, such as Disneyland, is for top managers to spend at least one day in their career touring the park dressed as Mickey Mouse or some other cartoon character. This provides them with the perfect opportunity to survey the scene and watch the customers without being noticed. Okay, well, we mentioned customer satisfaction at the beginning of this lecture, and I'd like to return briefly to that as it relates to what we've just been talking about. If the performance of a product falls short of the customer's expectations, the buyer is going to be dissatisfied. In other words, if the product you buy isn't as good as you'd expected, then the chances are you'll be unhappy about it. If, on the other hand, performance matches expectations and the product you buy is as good as you expected, then generally speaking, the buyer is satisfied. But smart companies should aim one step higher. They should aim to delight customers by promising only what they can be sure of delivering and then delivering much more than they promised. So then, if, as sometimes happens, performance is better than expected, the buyer is delighted and is twice as likely to come back to the store. Now, let's move on to look at the role of advertising.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.